Hey, I'm Smooneychad, and this is a series where I gradually make more and more unhinged designs, trying to beat Kerbal Space Program using aircraft only. And in this episode, we're going to be trying to build the perfect, if not insane, space shuttle, and sitting on some equally insane missions. Now, in the last video, everyone voted pretty much unanimously for me to go to Sarnus next, and in particular, its puffy little moon Tecto, which is pretty much perfect for this challenge. But the only problem is, this is going to be a very expensive mission, and it's going to need a lot of infrastructure in space for refueling and stuff like that to actually go there. And so we're going to need something that's able to build infrastructure in space and pull off some, really nice contracts. Maybe not the most flamboyant contracts, but the ones that get us some quick money, like satellite repairs and stuff. Now, you may have noticed I put on some Wolfhound engines on the back of there. Those are the most efficient liquid fuel and oxidizer regular rocket engines that you can get, and that's because this is the orbiter. This is the upper stage, basically, of the design. This design is heavily influenced and basically based on the British Aerospace Corporation's multi-unit transport and recovery device, or Mustard. It's a really cool spacecraft design, spaceplane design, shuttle design. I don't really know what you call this thing. All I know is everything related to it is aircraft, so it's pretty much perfect for a space shuttle solution for this series. It is, however, going to be a lot more capable than the actual Mustard design. One of the things we're going to be adding here is a robo-arm, and this is basically going to be for grabbing satellites, grabbing station parts, removing things from the payload bay, putting things in the payload bay. Going to be super useful for all of the missions that this thing is going to be really good for. After we add some essentials like solar panels and stuff, added these auxiliary jet engines that are going to be able to pop out, and that's going to hopefully give our stages the ability to return to launch site or a nearby runway or something, since some of them stage at really strange times. But to actually test out the flight characteristics of this, and if those engines actually work, I went ahead and threw together this transonic truss-braced wing kind of rip-off here, and as soon as it was done, I went ahead and took it out on a little bit of a test flight just to make sure that it can actually fly itself. This is going to be called the SO-13 Albatross, and the idea behind this plane is to be a test bed for the actual orbiter, so we can do like the next test that we're going to do as soon as we figure out how this thing flies and everything, but also a transport for the orbiter to be able to take it to different parts of Kerbin and transport it around. Turns out, though, it was a little bit underpowered, so we're going to go back to the VAB and quickly upgrade the engines to these from the Near Future Aeronautics mod, and of course strap our orbiter on the back of it, because I'm pretty sure it will fly perfectly fine now, and it sure did. We actually got it going really fast with this thing, and it had a really great climb rate. So we got up pretty high, around 11,000 meters, and the idea here was to turn back toward the KSC and release the orbiter, testing out the rocket engines and its ability to climb away and everything. Then we're going to be testing out several other things with it. So we're going to release it, light up the rocket engines, and there's just a little tiny bit of fuel in this, just enough to pull it away from the plane and gain a tiny bit more altitude and send it on its way toward the KSC. Now we'll go ahead and deploy those deployable extra jet engines and see if it kind of extends our glide slope a little bit while we're heading back at high altitude toward the KSC. And it did work for that. It worked really great with extending our glide out and giving us enough power to turn around. But here we went ahead and stalled the entire plane out. Just tipped the nose up and it went down to like 20 meters per second and completely stalled it out. And then we're going to be using those Juno engines to try to make it back to the runway. And we're doing this test at a super low altitude, so it's pretty darn dangerous, because if you don't make it back to the actual runway asphalt itself, then you end up landing before it and hitting all of the lights leading up to it, then jumping up the back of the runway and slowly landing on it. So with a stellar, successful test flight like that, I consider this approved. So back in the spaceplane hangar, we'll go ahead and get started on our booster stage for this whole spaceplane system, and we're going to basically remove all the bells and whistles out and add some extra fuel in that payload compartment there instead of actual, payload, since these are just going to be returning back to some launch site. We tried every single engine in the game and ended up settling, of course, on the Vector, which is by far the best choice for something like this. And we're going to go ahead and stack this on top of our center stage orbiter thingy, and then stacking another one on the bottom of that, because this is a goofy, weird design. And we had to, of course, rotate those vertically because the Mustard takes off vertically like a rocket, meaning we now have to switch to the uncharted territory that is the vehicle assembly building. And of course, spend half of our budget on just upgrading the launch pad and the VAB. Yeah, we basically ran out of money and couldn't fully upgrade the VAB, so we're limited to 255 parts, which this thing is really pushing close to that. So close that after I crewed it and everything, I actually had to remove some lights that I had on the side of the cockpits there just to light things up in space before we could actually launch it. But we did get it out on the launch pad, not the runway, the launch pad, and the true insanity of this design can be seen for the first time in daylight. And be not fooled, this is not a rocket, this is a plane, and proof of that is how aggressively we can gravity turn this because of all the control surfaces and wings that we have down there. We don't have to worry about this flipping out of control and going insane. Now, one of the first things we need to do almost immediately after launch, like 30 seconds after launch, is light up the center engines finally and stage that first stage off. That first stage has been getting drained by both the other stage engines there before the second stage gets drained. So the first stage gets drained by all engines, then the second stage on the outside gets drained by both engines, and then the center stage is left fully topped up for the journey to orbit. Now you can see here that we're doing a really cool gravity turn into orbit, and then it starts getting really messed up because of the thrust imbalance between the Wolfhound engines there and the 4 vectors. So we had to shut down 2 of the vector engines kind of manually to fix that torque situation there. And then our orbiter carries up to, well, orbit. And we get to see how much delta V and how much payload capacity this thing actually has. And it turns out that it has a pretty respectable payload capacity for a shuttle. It's able to carry up a full orange tank, the 36-ton orange tank, into orbit, and we're actually able to activate that orange tank and get extra delta V out of that, up to 2,000 meters per second of delta V if we use the fuel inside that orange tank, which is very helpful for long duration missions. We're gonna get our little robo arm out here and actually just yank the orange tank out of here. That's something that the robo arm's very useful for if you've got like a station's parts or something that are completely unpowered. It can, throw them around like this and shake everything up inside of them, completely ruin them, and then maybe dock it to the station without any RCS being required outside of, what's just on the shuttle there. So with our proof of concept test flight out of the way, we're going to go ahead and revert everything and get everything in line for the real missions today. We're going to pick up some contracts, this one for putting a new part on a satellite in orbit of the Mun, and then we're going to be building a space station around Kerbin, which you can imagine is going to be Stony Station, which is going to allow us to finish these 2 Taurus contracts while we're at it. And actually going to go to the administration building for the first time and pick up this strategy, which allows us to have a little bit of a discount on launch costs, since launch costs are just going up and up and up with every video. And speaking of that, to upgrade the VAB so we can actually launch this whole project, I resorted to having to mine the runway. Since we got ISRU equipment in the last video, I used it to go ahead and mine the runway and fill up those huge tanks over the course of a few weeks, and then recovered that for some extra money to finally upgrade the VAB. And then we're broke again. So I grabbed this Sentinel telescope thing that's going to give us some extra money just for accepting it, and that contract actually disappears later on. I'll catch you up with that when it actually happens, but yeah, that never ended up happening. We did get the money out of it though, just enough to launch one of these missions to repair that Mun satellite, which is right here in orbit around the Mun in this weird, very high polar orbit. But now it's time to get started on this mission and actually meet up with that satellite. This is the first serious launch of our new shuttle system here, so it's really important that everything goes according to plan, since we have absolutely no backup money if I accidentally mess up. This is our first serious launch of the SO-12 shuttle system, and it's really important that nothing goes wrong with this, because if something does and I mess up a save or something, we are completely broke. There is no money left over unless we complete this mission and get all of those shuttle stages back. So we just go ahead and stage that very first stage very early, as you can tell. You can still see the full KSC whenever that runs out of fuel, and then it's time for that second stage to carry us up to around Mach 3 or 4 before it actually gives out too. And as that second stage drains, we need to actually shut off 2 of the vector engines to help balance the thrust out. You can see it really helps while we squeeze out the last few little drops of fuel out of this thing and disconnect it as well. So you can imagine that the first stage returns the launch site, but the second stage is a little bit more questionable, as you'll see here in a minute. So once we're in orbit, we have 2,300 meters per second of delta V, and it's time to go ahead and recover those stages using the FMRS mod, which is the only reason why a system like this can even work. So you can imagine that the first stage, it's very easy for it to return back to launch site. It just comes right back down the runway here and lands like a regular old plane, and it lands on a very smooth landing.
That's a 10.
So then we're going to go up to the second stage as soon as we got this thing stopped, and the second stage is going to be a little bit more complicated because the second stage is going around Mach 3 and it's flying over the ocean. So the closest thing it can get to is Sandy Island, but even that's a little bit of a stretch since we have absolutely no fuel left besides just some fuel for our Juno range extending engines, which can't actually activate until we're a bit lower into the atmosphere. So, yeah, this thing is in some trouble because we're still really far out, nearly 100 kilometers out from Sandy Island, and it just stalls out with the Juno engines unable to keep this thing in the air and splashes down in the ocean. I'm obviously unhappy with that because I love returning to runways, but nevertheless, that counts as a recovery, even though we don't get as much money back as returning it to an actual launch site. So here we're going to go ahead and meet up with the satellite in the Mun orbit, and we got plenty of Delta V to do that, thanks to packing an orange tank along with us for the journey. Now, once we actually capture around the Mun here and match up our orbit to the whole satellite's orbit here, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that orange tank, just drain the rest of the fuel to our main tanks, and get rid of that orange tank because it's just extra weight, and, you know, you might need to recover a satellite out here or something like that. So it's always a good idea to have that payload bay cleared out. That's a really cool way of extending our range using the orange tank like that to actually extend it out. It's a really cool way of extending it out to the Mun and Minmus and stuff. Basically, this aircraft can service anything in the Kerbal system, and I really love that. It came out really great for service missions and stuff like this. We actually used the RCS thrusters for most of that rendezvous and stuff there. Very handy to have that much RCS fuel on board. And we went ahead and headed into IVA, where it's very clear that Bob is his usual self. And it's time to get Bill out and actually go out the door here and go put that gravioli detector, or whatever the heck it's called, on the satellite, which is the whole mission today. We're not going to grab the satellite or anything and disturb its orbit because there's really no need to, since Bill has to come out here and weld that on himself anyway. So he's going to go ahead and park right here next to the pretty big satellite, honestly, and go ahead and strap on that gravioli detector. Of course, using that really cool EVA building thing that was added in one of the last updates to KSP. And we're going to go ahead and do the science experiment on that satellite, since we basically own the satellite. Once you do a satellite contract, it's your satellite after that. It's a free satellite, so which is pretty darn cool. But after that, we're completely done here, so we got Bill back inside, and it's time to head back to Kerbal. So we're going to try to escape here in a manner that puts us back with an atmospheric encounter around Kerbal, and then of course slam into the atmosphere, pointing straight up to slow ourselves down. And after a few aero braking passes like that, I was able to just do this really aggressive maneuver and target ourselves right down to line up with the KSC runway. So basically, we're literally returning right back to launch site. And this is the first official real landing of the actual orbiter stage here. And it came out pretty darn good. All of the landings in this were really good. Even the one that was in the water was, you know, extremely slow and everything. But I really wish we could have got them all down to a runway. Here we're going to go ahead and pick up a command modules thing, because the station contract we have actually called for an extra thing to have a cupola on the station module. Now we're going to go ahead and build this station module, and this is going to be sent up to Stony Station for our next mission. If you can remember, Stony Station, we were originally going to build an actual station up there. Right now it's just a rock, and so I'm going to build this module here to the whole mission specifications, and of course to our payload bay size, and then go ahead and get some crew for that, and just bundle that in with the whole space station mission that we got going on. So we'll be able to complete, technically speaking, 3 missions at once with this. And we're going to go ahead and just take out those extra jet engines out of all of these stages to save some Delta V, and just they didn't seem to work too well for actually extending our range and everything, so I went ahead and got rid of them. Then we load in an absolutely absurd amount of Kerbals, and it's time to launch up to Stony Station. But we have to do it a little bit differently, because if you remember from this episode, we put Stony Station in a polar orbit around Kerbin, so we need to adjust the way we're launching a little bit and wait for that orbit to line up with the KSC and then launch directly north. And look how beautiful the SO-12 Martin stack is here on the launch pad. And of course it takes off flawlessly, but we're heading off toward the north this time, which is a little bit weird. But we go ahead and stage that first stage off, and you can see just how early that thing stages. It's within like 30 seconds. It literally is within 30 seconds of takeoff. So it's a very, very early stage. And we don't actually need to throttle those engines here because we're going to leave a fair amount of Delta V, a fair amount of fuel left in that second stage so we can get to a launch site this time and actually land. Plus, we don't need all of that extra Delta V this time around because we're just going to low Kerbin orbit. Even if it is polar low Kerbin orbit, it's still not as much as getting out to the Mun and stuff. So we're going to go ahead and land that first stage, which is, you know, barely a hop and a skip away from the runway, is able to just gracefully glide right back down to the runway that it came from, and, well, not came from. It came from the launch pad. I'm very used to everything being launched from the runway, if that's not evident. So here we're going to go ahead and disconnect that second stage and recover it as well. And it needs to go up here to somewhere where we've never been before, Cape Kerman. So we're going to go ahead and activate navigation there. And then I left a really good amount of fuel in this, nearly 1,000 meters per second of Delta V, so it can kind of steer itself back over to the runway. Now, as we approached up on Cape Kerman here, I don't think I was expecting just how stacked this whole base was. It has absolutely everything the KSC has, and maybe a little bit more than what the KSC has. A very nice launch site indeed. So we're going to go ahead and come around once just to bleed off some speed and have another good landing here. These planes fly so well. All of these stages fly really, really well for just being shuttles. They have a good lot of wing area, so they're pretty good. Around this time, back up in orbit though, our orbiter has met up with the asteroid and grabbed it with the robo arm. The asteroid known as Stony Station, that is. Even though it doesn't have any crew on board yet, it's just a rock. So we're going to try to fix that and get out the crew module here, which is a little bit of a tight fit. It's a very tight fit, and we end up kind of blowing up the crew, which is a tad bit of a problem, so we revert that back and use the extender feature of the robo arm there to extend the asteroid a little bit farther out and then let go of it and dock our little spacecraft to it there. Our first module of Stony Station, which has a science lab on board, meaning we can now take data like the sample from the asteroid there and store it and get a lot more science out of it. It also has a drill and some of the first things for like an ISRU system, though it doesn't have the actual converter that turns that ore from the asteroid into actual fuel and stuff. It has everything needed to run the drill, and a few science experiments just to store some extra data on there. And just these few science experiments offer a lot of science. Like, I think we end up getting like 500 science just from that those few little experiments here in Kerbin orbit, which is like the most mundane place you can be in the entire Kerbal system, basically. And we're getting that much science from it. Science labs are very, very overpowered. But now it's time to bring back our orbiter, and yeah, I kind of screwed it up. I made a quick save, and it was way, way too short of the KSC. So no matter how many times I tried, and without the engines, I took the engines off, the whole range extending engines, I just could not make it back to the runway and would come up short every single time and land in the water. So we landed in the water near the runway and ended up recovering only 3 of our tourists. It says here that one of them died, but they didn't actually die. That's one of the ones that we actually recovered. So one of our tourists is apparently still back up on Stony Station. So we don't actually have the second tourist mission complete. So they must still be hanging around up here somewhere. And of course we need to add some ISRU and other stuff up to Stony Station anyway. So I think it's time for us to make a return trip with a brand new module. This is going to be the final main module to Stony Station just to make it fully functional. And it's got an empty fuel tank, a polar scanning satellite, science experiment storage, solar power, and of course the ISRU for converting ore into fuel. And we've also upgraded the Martins to, instead of having a cargo bay, they have an actual rocket fuselage now, full of the liquid fuel and oxidizer. So they're going to get going quite a bit faster and farther down range before they actually need to stage this time, which is helpful for the second stage, but the first stage is getting a bit farther out now, so it's going a lot faster than it usually is whenever it actually stages. So after taking out our cameraman, here it is floating away from the stack, and it's still going well over Mach 1, nearly Mach 2, which is plenty enough speed and altitude to get back to the runway. However, it's still not enough to fix my piloting skills. So after porpoising down half of the runway, I decided it was time to actually land it. If you're wondering why my landings are suddenly extremely horrible, that's because I'm now trying to speed run this mission as fast as possible just to see how quickly I can get one of these SO-12 Martin missions done, because it does require 2 landings, the 2 booster landings, and then the orbiter landing, so they take quite a long time to pull off, especially given they're all at different locations and stuff. You can see here with this second stage, I accidentally ended up putting the engines on backward on this one because I redid the fuselage and everything, and I ended up landing it really hard too, and breaking the right landing gear off, causing the right wing to dig into the runway and slowly scrape down the runway before barreling off the side of it at remarkably slow speed, and then destroying most of the rest of the plane. But since I'm kind of in a hurry here, I went ahead, since Bill didn't die in this crash, I went ahead and recovered this. I guess Bill isn't so great of a pilot after all, even with the drone core in there. So we're going to go ahead and actually show the rendezvous with Stoney Station here, because I didn't show it last time. I accidentally didn't actually record the rendezvous from last time. That's the reason why I didn't show it. So we're going to go ahead and line it up here. It takes a few passes because I never do get the timing quite right to actually get that close pass with the station. But we eventually do, of course. And we're going to go ahead and rotate the station here for our convenience, since we now have reaction wheels and stuff on board. And you can tell I really didn't line that module up with the asteroid too well, so hopefully we can do that here in the future in a bit, and kind of fix the lineup there with the asteroids. It's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. We're going to go ahead and get the grabbing arm out here and grab the station. Since we have no crew compartment on that module, we're going to go ahead and transfer the last tourist over here, since I believe the other tourist for that mission is 2 at once to the station. I believe they're already on board the crew compartment here, so we're going to go ahead and put the other tourist to that mission on board as well. And since there's no expiration date for these missions, for these contracts, we're just going to leave her up there for a bit. I accidentally left her up there for the entire mission. I didn't take her back with us, so that wasn't actually intentional. That was not actually intentional, so we'll have to come back and get our tourists here in the future. But we're going to go ahead and dock our second modules here, our ISRU module here, to the station using that cool docking cam, which makes things really simple, very straightforward. So here's our finished Stoney Station. It's not the prettiest thing ever, and it's also very, very off-center, as you can tell. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect, let the asteroid rotate around, and then connect at a more aesthetically pleasing location and more lined up with the center of mass of everything. So there we go. It's a little bit better looking now, I think, now that we got the whole location sorted out and everything. And now we're going to go ahead and test out our ISRU capability and actually getting ore from the asteroid, which seems to work out pretty well. I never really am good at lining up how many radiators and stuff I need. But now I think with everything working, it's time to give a quick tour of Stoney Station from the first person's perspective of what the crew gets to see here at Stoney Station. And of course you can open up the doors and have them knock the absolute crap out of you. I literally started dying laughing in person whenever that happened. Just let the door slam you in the face. But anyway, here is the first crew compartment. This is the hitchhiker storage compartment. Has a lot of cargo space and plenty of crew space. Up to 4 crew can stay in there. And then here's our science compartment, our science lab, mobile processing lab, which has a good bit of crew compartment in here. Here's our 2 scientists hanging out in here. I got a nice views of everything. And then right there is the asteroid. We can't go inside the asteroid, unfortunately. I wish you could hollow them out and make it a habitat, but you can't. So that's all of the crew compartment of Stoney Station. It's not a huge station, but it's fun. I think it's a pretty good little station. We might end up taking it back down to Kerbin or something in the future with the Martin whenever it has outlived its usefulness. or we'll leave it up there for historical purposes and keep it crude or something. Here we are landing back at the KSC, and it's a beautiful landing. The sun's setting, and it's right down the center line. It's a very smooth landing overall, and it actually landed without any instruments too. So it's a pretty good landing, and now all that's left to do is head over to mission control, and we see that we've completed every mission but the 2 tourists that we accidentally left up at the station. And now we have a bunch of new ones, including literally the perfect mission for the next episode. A tourist is going to pay us for a grand tour of Sarnus, and they're literally going to pay us 8 million funds, which is insane. So keep an eye out for the next episode. If you want to make sure you absolutely catch it when it comes out, maybe subscribe to the channel. But either way, thank you so much for watching and keeping up with the series. This is Smooneychad, out.